There's one downstairs in the interior. Everybody's running around like crazy, so. I'd like to call the hearing to order. Earlier this month, we examined the nuclear weapons stockpile budget for the National Nuclear Security Administration. This morning, we will continue our consideration of the budget request for the NNSA with a focus on the Department's two other important national security programs, nuclear nonproliferation and naval reactors. I'd like to welcome back Admiral Klotz to testify on the budget request for the NNSA. I'd also like to welcome back Admiral Richardson and Ms. Harrington. We have had many discussions about your programs in recent weeks, and I look forward to your testimony today. The President's budget request for the non-proliferation programs is $1.94 billion, $324 million above last year's level. That amount includes $234 million for nuclear counterterrorism and emergency response programs that were previously funded within weapons activities. This proposed realignment is one of many changes in the budget request, and we hope to hear more from you today on how the strategies for non-proliferation are evolving and will be effective in meeting today's threats. The President's budget request for naval reactors also proposes a substantial increase. Compared to fiscal year 2015, the request is $1.38 billion or $141.5 million higher. Admiral, your programs are critical in providing our naval forces with the next generation propulsion systems that maintain our Navy's edge. I'd like to discuss how these efforts are proceeding and to understand what activities in your budget request are essential to ensuring a safe and reliable nuclear fleet. Please ensure that the hearing record, responses to the questions for the record, and any supporting information requested by the subcommittee will be delivered in final form to us no later than 4 weeks from the time you receive them. I also ask members to submit any additional questions for the record to the subcommittee by close of business tomorrow. With those comments, I'd like to yield to my ranking member, Ms. Capter, for any opening comments she might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome Administrator Klotz, Ms. Harrington, and Admiral Richardson. We're glad to have you back today, and we are very interested in your testimony. The threat of nuclear terrorism is one of the gravest national security threats and global threats that we face, and our nation must make real progress toward securing stocks of fissile material. As Mr. Putin continues his aggressive push to destabilize Ukraine and threaten the broader region, a redoubled non-proliferation effort seems a very wise investment. Since 2004, NNSA's nuclear non-proliferation programs have facilitated the removal of all weapons-grade highly enriched uranium from 17 countries, about 165 bombs worth of nuclear material. The Global Threat Reduction Initiative in particular has removed 234 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium, enough for 9 nuclear weapons, from Ukrainian soil, eliminating the risk of this material falling into the wrong hands. Unfortunately, this non-proliferation budget provides an insufficient increase to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and materials, with much of the proposed increase going to fund programs previously funded in weapons. Admiral, the Naval Reactors program is critical to the performance and continuation of what is the safest and most secure leg of our nation's nuclear triad. Naval Reactors has often been looked to for expert opinion and for management support to other government programs. Last year's cheating scandal obviously brought questions about the culture in the ranks, and hopefully you can report today on the progress you are seeing in restoring the nuclear Navy's tradition of safety while ensuring our nation's security over the long term. Thank you all for your continued great service to our country, and we look forward to your insights regarding recent changes in program schedules and costs, as well as more details on how this program has changed since last year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time.
Mr. Klotz?
Thank you, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Capter. Thank you for inviting us back to present the President's fiscal year 2006 budget request for the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration. and for our defense nuclear nonproliferation and naval nuclear propulsion programs in particular. As you pointed out earlier this month, we had an opportunity to discuss our weapons activity account, so we are glad to have the opportunity to focus on NNSA's other extraordinarily important missions to prevent, counter, and respond to the threat of nuclear proliferation and terrorism, and to support the capability of our nuclear-powered Navy to project and power and protect American and allied interests around the world. I'm pleased to be joined, as you pointed out, by Ms. Ann Harrington and Admiral Richardson, who will each highlight the details of their respective budget requests. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Steve Aoki, who is our Associate Administrator and Deputy Undersecretary of Energy for Counterterrorism and Counterproliferation, who is also here today. We've provided the subcommittee with a written statement and respectfully request that it be submitted for the record, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have, but first let me turn to Ms. Harrington.
Appreciate that. Your full statements will be included in the record. Ms. Harrington?
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Capter. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present the President's fiscal year 2016 budget request for the Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation Account. We value this committee's support for the mission and people of NNSA and are proud that our programs accomplished so much over the past year. Those accomplishments are captured in this recently released report, and we believe that the annual publication of Prevent, Counter, and Respond, a strategic plan to reduce global nuclear threats, will help better explain and elaborate what our program does. The report describes a highly complex and often unpredictable threat environment and our strategy to respond to it. As the ranking member pointed out, a year ago when we were here, Russia had only recently invaded Crimea, but we had not yet seen the buildup of armed conflict in eastern Ukraine or the rapid expansion of ISIS in the Middle East. These developments need the programs in this account to be able to execute our activities both for the threats that we can identify, but to remain agile, flexible, and ready to respond to the threats we cannot anticipate. To respond to this dynamic environment, we have implemented a strategic approach that brings the nuclear counterterrorism incident response and counterterrorism and counterproliferation programs from the weapons account to the Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation account. In addition, within my own program, the Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation Programs, we reorganized as of January 1st, 2015. We believe that these realignments strengthen our capability to respond to threats, and we propose to align program budgets to this new structure. By combining nuclear nonproliferation, counterterrorism, and response capabilities, we link our core competencies to meet the enduring and emerging threats that we face by preventing, countering, and responding to nuclear and radiological proliferation and terrorist acts. I know we're short on time, so I will submit the remainder of my statement for the record. I would like to note, however, that within the counterterrorism program, activities in that area have been substantially funded below the requested amounts for the last 2 years. We consider this a high priority, and I cannot overstate the importance of our request to restore $25 million for this crucial work in FY15, as well as the need to stabilize funding in the future. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Admiral Richardson?
Well, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Capter, thank you again for the opportunity to testify before you today. And I want to start off by saying how grateful I am for the support of this subcommittee for our work, and look forward to the discussions of the FY16 budget request. First and foremost, I think I must recognize that since my last testimony before this subcommittee, U.S. nuclear-powered warships, the 10 aircraft carriers, 14 ballistic missile submarines, 53 attack submarines, and 4 guided missile submarines operated for another year safely and effectively, steaming more than 2 million miles in support of our nation's interests. And 2014 had a number of highlights of those operations that I'd be grateful to talk about at a time when we have more time. Notably, though, this past January, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the submarine USS Nautilus getting underway on nuclear power. At a ceremony that recognized that event, Secretary Mavis Secretary of the Navy announced that the next attack submarine will be named after my predecessor and the father of the nuclear Navy, Admiral Rickover. So this progress and service to the fleet would be impossible without the steady support of this subcommittee. Naval Reactors' request for fiscal year 16 allows us to continue this work. The funding request, as you noted, sir, is for $1.38 billion, an increase of 11% over the 15 enacted funding level. But this request permits Naval Reactors to continue to support today's operational fleet by funding the talented engineers, tradesmen, and scientists that make up my technical support base. The request also enables us to deliver tomorrow's fleet by funding 3 national priority projects, designing the new reactor plant for the replacement to the Ohio-class submarine, related to that Ohio-class replacement, refueling the research and training reactor in New York, and then building a new spent fuel handling facility in Idaho. And I just want to pause here again to thank the subcommittee for your support in FY15 there, providing funding for that. And we are sprinting out of the blocks on that. I recently signed Critical Decision 1 approving that major milestone in this important project. Mr. Chairman, Naval Reactors' fiscal year 16 budget request is part of a closely coordinated and coherent Department of the Navy and Department of Energy budget that supports both my responsibility to regulate the safe and effective operation of the nuclear fleet and my role in both departments of Defense and Energy to support the security of our nation today and in the future. Thank you for the longstanding support of this subcommittee, and I look forward to discussing my program with you.
Thank you. And again, thank all of you for being here today. And as you mentioned, we have 10:30. We're supposed to be on the floor for the President of Afghanistan is here to speak to Congress and stuff. So this will be a little bit abbreviated, but we'll still be able to do our job. Mr. Administrator, the Secretary has convened an advisory board of nuclear nonproliferation. The board published an interim report in August 2014 that found, 1, the Department does not have a risk-informed analysis of priorities to guide its nonproliferation efforts, and the U.S. government does not yet have a compelling vision for the future of its nonproliferation efforts or how DOE's programs fit in that larger picture. How does the nonproliferation budget request address the highest national security risks? Are there interagency efforts ongoing to create a vision that's needed for the nonproliferation programs? And have you developed risk-based analysis of priorities to guide the formulation of your budget? And how might this kind of analysis improve your efforts? And you may have answered part of that with the reorganization during your opening statement.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Let me just briefly open, and then I'll obviously turn to Ms. Harrington, since this is her program. In fact, the report that Ms. Harrington alluded to, the Prevent, Counter, and Respond, is in fact a response to the findings of the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board to come up with a coherent long-term vision for how we work within the nonproliferation, counterterrorism, and incident response mission space. So we have labored long and hard to put together an integrated, comprehensive approach to that. And as we were doing that was also as we were developing the FY16 budget request. So the two sort of synergistically fed off of each other and resulted in both the submittal that we have, the budget request, as well as this report.
I'll add very briefly that in this report there is a graphic that we developed as part of this exercise that describes the threat continuum, ways in which we can respond, and which part of the organization would be responsible for various levels of that response, and where we work together and where we have somewhat independent approaches. It also describes how we work together within the U.S. government interagency and with international partners. The timing of the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board interim report was, in fact, almost perfect in terms of meshing with our own internal thinking about what we needed to do, and we benefited greatly from a number of conversations with that task force.
Good. Admiral, even though, and first of all, 60th anniversary of the Nautilus, huh?
Yes, sir.
That's amazing.
Prototype for that, as you know, is
Yeah.
up at our lab in Idaho. So,
Right,
so-
right. It's hard to believe that the nuclear navy has been around almost as long as I have. That's kind of scary, you know that. Even though overall funding for the naval reactors has been increased 31% over the past 5 years, this amount is short of the total amounts requested for your program in each of those years. To meet those differences between planned increases and actual funding levels, Naval Reactors has had to defer many of its planned activities and even transferred funds from the Navy under the Economy Act of 2014. To understand the long-term impacts of your program, the committee directed Naval Reactors to conduct a comprehensive budget review this year. Have you completed the directed budgetary review, and if so, what have you found? How has the Naval Reactors program coped with funding levels provided over the past several years? And are any additional Economy Act transfers from the Navy planned, or was this a one-time occurrence?
Sir, thank you for the question. We are in final coordination for that report, and we should be sending that over to you very, very shortly. With respect to the construction of our budget and the management of shortfalls over the past few years, we have, exactly as you said, been just managing by deferring required maintenance. And so, for instance, we have deferred over 40 projects that address matters like failing sewage systems, plumbing systems, electrical systems that are as old as Nautilus in some cases, 60 years old since the dawn of the atomic age. And so those sorts of projects, we are just, you know, when shortfalls come, as you know, and as was discussed before, you know, we're going to prioritize the money to continue the operational mission today and service that fleet tomorrow. And so these are the sorts of decisions that get made. But it does result in a degradation of those facilities over time. As well, you know, of those 40 smaller projects, in addition to those, 4 major construction projects have been deferred as well. As you know, that the Economy Act transfer resulted from the fact that we just were unable to afford some significant maintenance on operating reactors in New York and some high-performing computers to continue the Ohio replacement. That Economy Act transfer was not a planned event. That was a reactive event, and we certainly don't have any of those types of activities planned in the future. And so
Do you believe with the budget request that you have this year that if that were met, there wouldn't be an Economy Act transfer?
Sir, our
Wouldn't be
budget
necessary.
request is a judicious request that supports our work, and if that request is met, there will be no transfers required.
Okay, thank you. The Advanced Test Reactor serves an important role for our nuclear navy as well as for civilian nuclear research and development. The ATR is an aging reactor that will require investments to keep it operating into the future. The Office of Nuclear Energy has been working with Naval Reactors to develop a plan to address those needs, but so far we haven't reached a mutual agreement on those needs. What is the status of the joint planning effort, and what is causing the delay, and what is holding things up? What is your assessment of the status of maintenance and operations of the ATR? Is the facility in a position to support Naval Reactors' needs for the foreseeable future?
So I think with respect to the Advanced Test Reactor, a couple of things that characterize our approach. One is it is absolutely critical to our business. You know, it is a unique capability that we rely on to do critical testing of materials going forward. So it's absolutely fundamental to what we do. The second feature is, as you said, it's an aging reactor. This is another reactor that's about 50 years old, and so those, you know, require maintenance to maintain safe and reliable operation. We've been working very closely with the Office of Nuclear Energy and the operators of the Advanced Test Reactor, and any delays have been refining and getting sufficient level of detail in terms of what it would require to arrive at a stable, predictable, comprehensive funding level that would actually improve the reliability of that reactor going forward. And so that has been a back and forth process, but until I get that, I would be unwilling to come to you and make a request for increased funding. As it so happens, I got that final plan in my headquarters on Monday evening. We're working very closely to just mop up some few small questions. I anticipate that this summer we'll have a comprehensive plan to go forward and continue to keep the Advanced Test Reactor operating and doing the critical work it does for our program.
Thank you. Mr. Administrator, the DOE and the NNSA are moving forward to meet the direction from this subcommittee to submit an independent, verified life cycle cost estimate for the MOX and downblend options of the plutonium disposition program. This estimate is due next month. There was also related direction to the Department in the National Defense Authorization Act, which is due in September. Are you aware of any errors or shortcomings in the report you submitted last spring, which analyzed the 5 alternatives? How did or will you weigh political and practical risks with alternatives to MOX? And should the lowest total life cycle cost operation be the primary criteria for selecting an alternative with the shutdown at WIP? Is it feasible that these proposed materials, if it was blended down, would go to the waste isolation plant? And will the department select a preferred alternative at the conclusion of these review process? Touchy subject.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, in the FY15 budget request, the administration had recommended $221 million to put the MOX fuel fabrication facility project into cold standby. Others had a different opinion, and we were directed to continue construction, which we did. And then in the FY 2015 enacted omnibus appropriation, the 221 was actually plussed up to $345 million with the instruction to continue construction, which we are, and also to do the 2 reports which you just mentioned. So this year we're requesting $345 million. It's essentially a continuation of services, level funding approach to that while we wait for the results of these 2 reports. My understanding is the first report, which is due on April 15th, is on time, on schedule, so it will be delivered at that time. It addresses essentially 2 options. One is continue with MOX, the MOX plan. The other is to consider the one of the 5 options which we rolled out in a report almost a year ago, last April, known as the dilution and disposition option. The other one in September will be done. We'll look at all 5 options which we looked at. So I think it's probably best to wait till we see what actually comes out of that report. They're still working on it, but as I said, I'm pretty optimistic that it'll be out in mid-April. And then our expectation is we'll engage in a dialogue with the interested parties in Congress in terms of where we go forward, not only as an administration but as a government, in how we deal with the disposition of 34 metric tons of weapons-grade plutonium, which we've agreed to do in an agreement with Russia.
It, in large part, becomes a political decision then. One other question. Ms. Harrington, in February, DOE issued a final Part 810 rule, the regulation governing the export of nuclear technologies. The chief concern of the regulated community is the slow and inefficient process through which it has been administered. This slow process puts U.S. firms at a competitive disadvantage to nuclear exporters from other countries, diminishes U.S. influence on the nuclear safety, security, and nonproliferation norms, and ultimately costs American jobs. Though many of the concerns identified by industry were not addressed in the final rule, the NNSA has provided strong assurances that it would remedy its inefficient licensing approval process through a process improvement program. How is the NNSA improving its process, and how much of this budget request will go toward achieving meaningful improvements? What is the average processing time for a typical application, and why didn't the final rule establish any time limits on the NNSA for processing of applications? Effective implementation of the PIP is vital to U.S. competitiveness. So what are the implementation schedules for the PIP, and what metrics are you using to track its success?
Thank you for that question. I will take parts of it for the record because I don't have all the details with me. But what I can tell you is getting the performance improvement plan and the e-licensing system active are high priorities, not just for my office, but for the administrator and for the secretary. We were recently asked what would be needed to accelerate getting the e-licensing system up and running. The issues that we're dealing with right now are mostly involved with security, and if we cannot guarantee security to our U.S. applicants, then we will have a serious problem with them feeling comfortable using the system. I actually saw the demo of the system just yesterday and was very impressed. I think this is going to be a user-friendly system. It will have layers of security. They are putting some polishing touches on a number of things, and we have now started looking internally to identify some additional funds this year in appropriate budgets to be able to accelerate the completion of that system so it will be up and running soon. But in terms of the details of the dates and so forth, that's a little bit in flux right now because we are right in the middle of an acceleration process. But we're giving this very high priority. We are very happy with the way the rule came out. Our feedback from industry so far has been very successful. The next major hurdle, as you noted, is getting the licensing system up and running.
Thank you. Ms. Kaptur?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Klotz, in the 2015 Omnibus Bill, Congress prohibited new funds from being used for new projects in Russia without a secretarial waiver, explaining why such work is in the U.S. national security interest. Could you please tell us, is there any funding in this budget request for work in Russia?
Can I defer that to
Please.
Ann?
There is no funding in this budget for Russia. It did not escape our notice that the funding for 15 was taken out of the budget for Russia. We agreed with that move and therefore did not include funding in 16.
So are we to assume the NNSA has terminated all ongoing work in Russia?
We have not. There is still some work that we can do in Russia. Russia remains a very high priority for us because of the amount of material that is in Russia, the continued vulnerability of their security and material accounting systems, and the ongoing threat of nuclear trafficking, much of which has historically come out of Russian facilities. They also have insider threat within their facilities, and we've seen examples of this in the past. So we remain open to collaboration with Russia in very narrow areas of nuclear security, nonproliferation, and threat reduction.
Ukraine was left with a nuclear legacy from the Soviet Union. Ukraine has also become an important state for countering smuggling of nuclear materials out of Russia, where the largest stockpiles of dangerous nuclear materials exist. Could you please tell us what the NNSA is doing, if anything, in Ukraine, considering the present situation there?
Okay. I would be very happy to. As you might remember, shortly after the Russian incursion into Crimea at the beginning of last March, we had the 2014 Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague. On the margins of that meeting, various countries, including the United States, got together to discuss what we could do to provide assistance to Ukraine in this very critical period. We have continued to work very closely with the Ukrainian government at all levels, including with the President, to identify what actions both the United States and the international community could do to reinforce border security, to help them stand up an expanded National Guard capability, and our colleagues at DoD were very instrumental in that capacity, and also to strengthen the borders on the exterior of Ukraine, so that if something were to come over, nuclear material, radiological sources, whatever might pose a threat or be attempted to smuggle, if something came through the eastern area of Ukraine, then we would be able to identify it if it were taken out of Ukraine. We also provided radiological pagers to law enforcement and training, and we continue to work with them. About an additional $1 million has been put into shoring up those capabilities over the past year.
If I could add, Ms. Harrington's staff has prepared for me, I think, a very helpful matrix which lays out all the work that we have in the FY15 budget as well as what's in the FY16 budget request in the area of the neutron source facility, nuclear smuggling and detection work, radiological security, nuclear forensics laboratory. So with your permission, I'd like to submit this for the record that provides a breakdown by every spending category, what we propose, what we have been doing, what we propose to do in Ukraine.
General, from your knowledge, what is the best way to ensure the security of nuclear material when you're dealing with unstable countries?
Well, in the case of, in dealing with unstable countries, that tends to be one of our greatest concerns, is in areas where there may not be as great a control over the full range of facilities within that country. That's where security becomes extraordinarily important. In the case of Ukraine, we are working with the Ukrainian government. They have been very cooperative. They have asked a number of things from us. We have had our People Ann's deputy was just over there a few weeks ago, along with Undersecretary of State Rose Godmiller, looking at one of the facilities that we had helped work with. But this is an extraordinarily important task, not just in Ukraine, but across the range of countries that we have to deal with, to make sure that the special nuclear materials and the radiological materials in both established countries, but also countries that have internal difficulties, are secure, because the one thing that a potential proliferant, or the one thing that a potential terrorist needs, is access to that material.
Mrs. Harrington, on this report that you referenced, in terms the American people can understand, could you summarize other areas of the world that are in turmoil where we have either lost track of or are in danger of losing track of dangerous nuclear materials?
I can answer some of that here, but most of the answer we would prefer to give you in a classified briefing,
Right.
Just because there are sensitivities we shouldn't talk about here.
I understand. I know the chairman has a time problem. I'll just say for the record here, Mr. Chairman, going back to 1994, when this country was a signatory to something called the Budapest Memorandum, and the United States, along with our partners in Britain and Russia at the time, promised Ukraine that if she were to give up her nuclear weapons, which she agreed to do, that she would have a security agreement that would protect her territorial integrity. That isn't being done. And it creates a very difficult situation, I think, for our country to have signed an agreement where words are now being interpreted in a different way. So you probably didn't have anything to do with that at the time. Maybe tangentially you did. But I just say, as an American and as a member of Congress, that is very troubling to me when we don't keep our word. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Valadeo? Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Administrator, Admiral, Ms. Harrington, for coming today. Admiral, last year Naval Reactors were embroiled in a cheating scandal where it was discovered that dozens of personnel in the nuclear Navy had viewed a leaked training exam at some point over the past year and did not report it. What have you done over the past year to prevent such events from happening again in the future, and what did you find to be the root causes of these circumstances, and do you believe they have been addressed?
Sir, thank you for that question, and obviously we've taken that incident very, very seriously in our program. Our efforts formed up along three major vectors. I'll outline the three vectors quickly, but then I want to spend our valuable time here talking about what I think is the most fruitful one. First and perhaps most direct, we did have to address the specific misconduct of those individuals that were involved, and so I've been through that, and yeah, I made myself the consolidated disposition authority for those matters. We investigated and heard every one of those cases, and at the end of the day, on the order of 37 sailors were found guilty in that incident. 37 more were found to be completely innocent as well, and so we did do a thorough investigation of those. Second, we also took a look at just our exam security processes, our procedures there, found some vulnerabilities, and we have closed up and continued to improve exam security. The third and most fruitful effort was to really look at kind of the climate or the command atmospherics that may have led to this. And even though that type of behavior we can never condone, neither can we pass up the opportunity to look at ourselves very hard and see what sort of systemic changes that we can take. And so over the last year, well, almost immediately after the event, we held a leadership summit, first of its kind at my headquarters, where we brought in the leadership from around our program to discuss that event and discuss what may have contributed to it. And since then, you know, guided by the insights from that initial summit, I personally have held town hall events at our training command, certainly, where the incident took place, but also the fleet centers, with my headquarters leaders, with the future commanders in the Navy at the Naval War College, and shipyard leaders. And so, in summary, over the past year, I've probably personally talked to 2,500 people in a training slant town hall type of an event, and those lasting 90 minutes to 2 hours apiece. Guided by the insights from that meeting, I've also had the opportunity to speak to Navy leadership at the 4-star level and above about what we've learned. By virtue, we've also taken a look at the structure of the training program itself. We engaged the staff and faculty so that we wanted to make sure that we got their insights, which are probably the most important. And again, guided by what we learned there, we've removed over 100 requirements, which I would say were, you know, the weight or the burden of accomplishing that requirement just didn't merit the benefit that we got out of it. And so we've removed those, more than 100, and there are more to come. We've adjusted the class sizes to better match the faculty size, and we've also improved the conduct of maintenance on the training reactors so that we provide them with more training time rather than maintenance time. We've learned a number of things from that. I will tell you that my thinking has been greatly sharpened by what has been about a 6-month period of engaging in these town halls, and I am right now doing the final reviews, and I'm ready to promulgate formal guidance that will institutionalize some of those lessons learned going forward. So we're just about at that time. Furthermore, I am sharing all the lessons that we learned with the Big Navy, lessons in my program with Big Navy, both by chairing an effort to reduce administrative distractions across the Navy, and also to share with the Navy Leadership and Ethics Center in Newport, Rhode Island, those lessons that may be applicable to the broader Navy itself.
All right. Change subject a little bit. Mr. Administrator, the budget request again proposes to move counterterrorism and emergency response activities to the non-proliferation from weapons. Why do you believe these activities are better aligned with the non-proliferation programs, and how do they contribute to the advancement of the U.S. proliferation goals?
Thank you for that question. There's two reasons. First of all, the money for counterproliferation, counterterrorism, incident response, emergency operations was nested primarily in the weapons activity account. Weapons activity account is focused primarily on our life extension programs as well as the infrastructure which supports our scientific, technical, and engineering efforts associated with the weapons activity. So we thought in terms of trying to understand where the money was, it ought to go with what the function is. The second aspect of it is, as we indicated in our statements, we're approaching the whole mission space associated with preventing nuclear terrorism and nuclear proliferation now as a continuum, a spectrum that runs from preventing would-be proliferators and terrorists from getting hold of nuclear material, and then if somehow they do, how would we counter that? And then, God forbid, somehow if they used an improvised nuclear device or a radiological device, how would we respond to that? So it seemed to make sense to us both conceptually and in terms of keeping the books straight to have all that in the same appropriations account.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Harrington, General Klotz, Admiral Richardson, good to see you all. I know time is of the essence this morning, but I do want to thank you all. Admiral, going to the Chairman's District was wonderful in Idaho, and I appreciated that trip, and I learned a lot about that, so I thank you all, and I know...
Learned a lot about Idaho, too.
And they love their congressman. And kudos to our great chairman.
He's good.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. Ms. Harrington, thank you. What is the focus of the new global material security program, given that the efforts with Russia have been significantly reduced?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Fleischman. As I mentioned in response to Mrs. Kaptur, we still will continue a limited amount of activity in Russia, but not with any funds from 2016. We were working through whether we would propose to continue some under a waiver, but that process is not yet complete. But also, as Mrs. Kaptur noted, there are many other countries of concern where there is instability, terrorist presence, and nuclear material, and in some cases, nuclear weapons. And so our attention is turning increasingly to some of those challenges as well. So across the global material security portfolio, we have found that there is no lack of work to do. When we executed our reorganization on January 1st, we consolidated programs under that area in a way that I believe make much more sense functionally. For example, our nuclear smuggling detection and deterrence program now includes the nuclear forensics element that previously lived in what is normally considered our policy office. So on nuclear smuggling, which falls under this program, we're now offering a comprehensive program that looks both at the detection but also at the analytical side of identifying and then addressing material trafficking. So we will come back to you as we go forward, probably in a classified setting, to describe in more detail some of these activities.
Thank you. Ms. Harrington, if the administration concludes that there is no near-term need for creating new domestic uranium enrichment capabilities, do you worry that our technical leadership in this area could atrophy, and will we be at a disadvantage with respect to the development of new technologies for safeguarding or detecting enrichment facilities?
Let me take that if I could,
Sure.
Sir. As you know, we are maintaining in a warm status the centrifuges which were developed as part of the American Centrifuge Project, while we decide the need for U.S. only unobligated low-enriched uranium will be for things like production of tritium and other needs in the United States. Last year, the Congress appropriated somewhere around $97 million to do that. We're requesting $100 million to do that in FY16, while we continue the process of determining what are the tritium requirements, how much unobligated low-enriched uranium is there out there, and how long will that last to meet the national security needs that we have. But we have to ask ourselves, I think, as a nation, and this is what we will consider during the course of this year, is, what is our requirement as a responsible nuclear power for the ability to do enrichment of uranium? And that is, I think that's one of those overarching strategic questions which we're going to have to come to grips with as we work through this process of examining what our precise needs are, but the larger strategic question that I think is at the heart of your question.
I would add that's also now in the weapons account, not in the Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation.
I appreciate that. And as a follow-up to that, do you all believe that you've got sufficient resources to ensure that we maintain our technical competence in this area?
I think for the coming year, we do. The question will be, as we work through this process in the coming year, we'll have better answers for you at the conclusion of that.
Okay.
But I'm satisfied. I've had an opportunity, as you know, when you and I were last down in Oak Ridge, I went over to see our people who are doing this particular work, and have visited the plant in Piketon, Ohio, and I'm convinced that we have a very sophisticated cadre of people who are paying attention to this, both on the federal side as well as on the M&O contractor side. But we will have to make decisions soon about how we go forward in this particular activity.
Appreciate your efforts, and I thank you all very much. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Admiral, the Energy and Water Bill carries a provision each year which requires that all projects with a total project cost of greater than $100 million have an independent cost estimate. I understand that Naval Reactors follows a slightly different project management process than the rest of the department. The current cost range for the spent fuel recapitalization tops out at about $1.4 billion, which is about $400 million more than the original cost range approved in 2008. Is it possible that there will be additional costs due to delays in funding since 2008? And what is the current estimated cost of this project, and what are the main risks to keeping those costs from rising farther? And when do you expect to provide the subcommittee with an independent cost estimate for the project?
Sir, I will tell you that the current cost of the project is about $1.65 billion. Most of the cost increases that we've seen since the original proposal for the project are almost entirely due to escalation and delays. There's been no change in the requirements of the project. The project continues to get more definition in terms of, we start with a very firm understanding and statement of the requirements. We're now actually proceeding into a more detailed design of those projects, following every intent of the DoD 413.3 Bravo instruction. And so, even though we implement that under a Naval Reactors version of that, because of our dual-hatted nature, we meet or exceed the requirements of the DOE order. I will commit to you that if we're funded according to the requests, there will be no cost increase. We'll deliver that facility. Key to that will be making sure that our design is sufficiently mature, very mature, before we start building. And we've learned the lessons from the rest of my colleagues in NNSA in terms of scoping the requirements for various parts of the facility, so that we don't do everything at the, according to the most stringent requirements. And as part of that process, we will conduct an independent cost estimate and be happy to share that with the committee.
Thank you.
Sir.
Ms. Harrington, the United States previously advocated for the establishment of an international nuclear fuel bank to provide peaceful access to nuclear energy and to prevent proliferation of uranium enrichment capabilities. The basic fear was that developing states might be politically cut off from the nuclear fuel supplies and would therefore feel the need to have their own indigenous enrichment capabilities. The United States previously offered $50 million for such efforts back in 2009. but not much has been done for the past several years. Ukraine is now in the situation where their nuclear fuel supplies are endangered due to the political issues with Russia. Nuclear power supplies nearly 50% of Ukraine's electricity needs. Is there anything that the DOE is doing or could be doing for Ukraine's nuclear fuel issues with reliance on Russia for its nuclear fuel? And should the U.S. be moving forward with its nuclear fuel bank to help out Ukraine and other countries that might be in the same predicament in the future?
Thank you, Chairman. Let me break that into the two components.
Okay.
First, what is happening with the LEU fuel bank. We understand from the International Atomic Energy Agency that the host government agreement is now complete, and the plan is to submit it to the Board of Governors for concurrence in the coming months. So that is a very substantial step forward. There have been some issues back and forth between the IAEA and Kazakhstan about the details of that agreement. Those now appear to be resolved. So we're very encouraged that both we, the European Union, and others who have provided funding to support both the fuel bank purchase of uranium as well as the physical fuel bank, that this is now going to come to fruition. So that's point number one. Absolutely correct that Ukraine gives us a very good example of the kind of need that this fuel bank could respond to. Fortunately, in the case of Ukraine, there was already a U.S. company that had been working in Ukraine to qualify its fuel. That would be Westinghouse, and that's been in the open press. What we understand is that the fuel is now qualified. It could be used in that reactor or in any similar reactors of Russian origin for power production. So, this I think illustrates again, the close cooperation. This is really on the fuel. It's more of a nuclear energy issue, but we work very closely because there are security and nonproliferation elements to getting power into Ukraine. So Pete Lyons, and I know you know him well, and I have met jointly with the Ukrainian regulator, and they seem very happy with this as a possible option for them in the future.
If I could just add to that, Secretary of Energy Moniz gave a major address on Monday in which I would say a third of his remarks focused on what we have been doing with Ukraine in the area of nuclear power. As he pointed out, and much more eloquently certainly than I can, over 50% of their power in Ukraine comes from nuclear sources. But as Ann alluded to, using Soviet, Russian design reactors meant that they were dependent upon Russian sources for fuel. So we have, for a number of years, worked very hard to be able to qualify. We, the United States and U.S. Industry, have worked very hard to qualify fuels that could be used as an option in these reactors, as well as any reactors of Soviet or Russian design in any other states that surround Russia. We've also been working on the waste side of that as well. How you would dispose, how Ukraine would be able to give them options besides just repatriating spent fuel to Russia as a means of dealing with that. So this has been a very, very active program over several years, even preceding the Russian invasion of Crimea and disruptions in eastern Ukraine.
Thank you. Ms. Cantor? Oh, Ms. Roybal, I know you've been at another hearing that I was at earlier also.
Administrator Klotz, earlier the Nuclear Smuggling Detection and Deterrence Program was referenced, and I was hoping you could provide more details. Under the Department's budget request, the Nuclear Smuggling Detection and Deterrence Program received roughly a 6% funding cut from fiscal year 2015. As you know, the Nuclear Smuggling Detection and Deterrence Program, formerly known as Second Line of Defense Program, is a key component of multi-agency, multi-layer defense network that strengthens our global capability to deter, detect, and interdict illicit trafficking in special nuclear and other radioactive materials at key international seaports. What is the current status of the nuclear smuggling detection and deterrence program in successfully preventing smuggling of nuclear devices into the United States through our ports? And could you explain the reason for the requested reduction in funding from fiscal year 2015?
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to, if we could, we'll tag team this. Let me just say at the policy level, this is an extraordinarily important effort and activity that we're involved with. And the new term for detection and deterrence, I think, captures it very, very well. There are those who would place a very, very high standard and say that we have to be able to detect absolutely everything that may come out of a particular country. We have to be able to maximize, optimize our ability to detect, but a large part of it also is the deterrent. So if a would-be smuggler knows that there is a range of potential detection mechanisms which would keep him or her from smuggling that, we think that's a large part of the success. Same thing for airport screening, same thing for other types of screening at the border. Again, as we mentioned earlier, a key to keeping would-be proliferators and terrorists from doing what it is they would seek to do that would harm our interests and the interests of our allies, the number one task is to keep special nuclear material out of their hands. And if Ann can address the specific programmatics.
First, we absolutely agree with you that NSDD is a core element of our strategy. If we can eliminate the material at the source, that is our first preference, but if we can't, then you secure it. If the security fails, then you have to be able to detect and prevent the material from reaching either a trafficking network, a terrorist group, etc. So we have established partnerships in 50 countries. We have over 3,000 fixed portal monitors at 550 sites, including 45 large container seaports, and we work very closely with the Department of Homeland Security on their container security initiative, and those two dovetail in important ways. And we've got 76 mobile sites deployed in 18 countries. One of the reasons you're seeing a small decline in the budget is because many of our partners are now moving into what we call the sustainability phase. They are now taking full responsibility for the maintenance and operations of these facilities, and we consider this a huge part of our success story because it means there's a commitment on the other end to continue. We, of course, will continue to exchange best practices, do exercises, and run training programs, some of which we do jointly with other elements of NNSA, for example, our emergency response colleagues, but other of our training programs are actually co-developed with the FBI and with law enforcement agencies in countries, so we're sure to bring all of those components together. But it is mostly the good news story about the ability of countries to assume their own responsibility for these facilities. Also, we have a number of requests to work with countries that we consider high-income countries. So those are not places where we would provide actual funding for the equipment. We would support our laboratories and our technical experts to work hand in hand with those countries to develop systems, to help test and exercise systems, but the major investment would be on, would depend on our partner countries.
Admiral Richardson, this month the Federation of American Scientists issued a report on shifting over time the naval nuclear propulsion program from high-enriched uranium to low-enriched uranium. The report specifically mentioned the advantages of an attack submarine design that will eventually follow the current Virginia-class design. This will reduce the proliferation risks that the Federation sees in continuing to rely on high-enriched uranium. What are your views on the findings and recommendations of this report? and on the idea of shifting the naval nuclear propulsion program to greater use of low-enriched uranium?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. And consistent with the report that I provide to Congress on our views of the use of low-enriched uranium for naval reactor cores, I've got a copy here. Currently, if we were to, with today's technology, employ low-enriched uranium, that would just, because of the energy density, reduction in energy density, that would just require more refueling of our reactors. Specifically, I think the only application that we could conceive of right now is in an aircraft carrier because of you have more size to work with on an aircraft carrier. That additional refueling would, just the refueling alone would come at a cost of near $1 billion and take years of operational availability out of that ship because we would have to bring it into the shipyard and refuel it instead of keeping it at sea. To develop the core that would go in there, that is an extremely complicated and technical matter. I would estimate that would, to qualify a core that could go in a nuclear-powered warship and survive the battle damage requirements for that core, I would say that we're talking near a decade of research and development and in the neighborhood of $2 billion to get there. We have done some initial exploratory types of looks at this type of technology. There are some potential ways ahead to get to a core that employs low-enriched uranium. Success is by no means guaranteed or assured in these efforts, and again, we'd have to be properly funded to even continue this exploration. I will say that doing that and fitting an LEU core into a submarine would be extremely challenging just because of the footprint concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Again, we've come to 10:30, and we have to be on the floor for the President of Afghanistan. So I appreciate, sincerely appreciate your being here and your willingness over the last 3 months to come and meet with our committee and with me personally and update me with some of the briefings and stuff that we've had, and your willingness to make yourself available to committee members for the important work that you do. And my wife is looking forward to having dinner with you and your wife when she gets out here. So
Sounds great, sir.
Again, thank you for your work, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Richard.
Committee's adjourned.